All right, well, this evening we are to patience as far as the fruit of the Spirit that we're talking about. And does anyone in this class not need a lesson on patience? I really want to sit down and talk to you and pick your brain if that's the case. You are an amazing individual. This is probably the one, I'm sure my wife, my lovely, caring, forgiving wife, and my amazing children would say I probably need the most work on, so I'll try to butter them up from that standpoint. To kind of kick us off, in one direction there, a few quotes for you. Patience is not the ability to wait, but the ability to keep a good attitude while waiting. It's easier to find men who will volunteer to die than to find those who are willing to endure pain with patience, said the great Julius Caesar. Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet, the philosopher said. The great politician from across the pond, I'm extraordinarily patient, provided I get my own way in the end. Isn't that kind of like most of us? You can learn many things from children, such as how much patience you have, for instance. And then I want patience, and I want it now. And I say that was probably spoken by everybody in this room at some point during your life. But is patience, can you have too much patience? Are some people overly patient? One person was. When I was a young man, I vowed to be patient and never marry until I found the ideal woman. Well, I found her, but unfortunately she was waiting for the ideal man. So he wasted a lot of time looking for the right woman. So if you were going to kind of define what patience was to somebody or in your own life, how would you define it?
I thought that first quote was pretty well done. Patience is the ability to keep a good attitude while waiting.
Yeah. Okay. Keeping a good attitude while you're waiting, while you're enduring. Has to do with your attitude during many different circumstances, does it not? To kind of give you a textbook definition, the quality of bearing through provocation, misfortune, or pain without complaint, loss of temper, irritation or the like, an ability or willingness to suppress restlessness, or annoyance when confronted with delay. Any of those little pop out at you a little bit more, particularly for me, the last one was delay. That's what Terry would tell you my big thing is, I just really seem to react in a weird way if I'm going to be late to something. So you probably pick out something in there that probably hits home with you. Why is patience so critical? What happens when you're not patient? What's the end result of it?
Conflict.
Conflict? All right, be a little bit more specific. Anger. So it can escalate to anger. What else? Of course, anger can get out of control. It has a lot of different ramifications to it. Hurt feelings. Yeah, a lot of emotional, a lot of relationship issues. What else? Frustration. Okay.
Lack of teaching.
Lack of teaching.
Yeah, like in dealing with your children, if you're trying to get to the point, you lose your temper. Well, the point you're never going to get to.
Sure. And ultimately, I had down what it teaches. I mean, it's ultimately what that teaches children. What it is that it instills in them. And then from a spiritual sense, the consequences that can carry. As Paul encourages the unbelieving wife, to be patient with her husband. I mean, you think about your situation right now with a believing spouse, and sometimes you get frustrated with them. If somebody doesn't hold the same values as you, isn't there the opportunity for that to be a much more difficult situation? So Paul obviously expects those individuals, asking those ladies to be patient in that situation because of the teaching implication of it.
Scott, with all those other things, when we allow the frustration or the anger of what to get in the way, what often happens is we end up using poor judgment, making bad decisions, which in turn hinders us trying to get to where we want to be to begin with.
Correct.
And can have sometimes some long-term consequences because of that, the poor choices that we make, and poor decisions that are made.
Absolutely. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about towards the end of the class are going to hit right at what John is speaking about. We probably all know someone who we consider a very patient person. And sometimes we kind of even look at that person and we say, oh, they're almost like a saint for what they put up with. And that's a little natural when you think about that application or correlation, because they are putting forth a very godly characteristic to have that patience, to rise above what it is. When somebody endures that type of patience, we also often refer to them as, say, kind of give them what type of title? They have the patience of who? Yeah, of Job, absolutely. Because obviously he was somebody that showed great patience. Where does that phrase come from? And it doesn't come from the book of Job. You remember? Over in James, the 5th chapter, 10 through 11, says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord, as you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. You think about why James is writing this. You go back to Acts, the 6th chapter, 7th chapter. Stephen has just been the first martyr. The 8th chapter, the Christians are going everywhere trying to be safe because they're being attacked by the Pharisees, and ultimately the Romans are coming down on them. Around the 12th or 13th chapter, the apostle James is executed. So then the writer of James, he's trying to assure these brethren of, listen, you're going to endure things that aren't your fault. It's because you're a Christian, because it's life, things are going to happen. But you must endure. And let me hold up for you somebody that you all know about, a man by the name of Job. So it's easy to sometimes sit there and say, oh, you need to endure this because that person endured it. Johnny, you got a broken finger. Well, Susie's got a broken leg over there, so you just need to suck it up. And sometimes, it's easy for us to try to fall into that, say, well, we got to suck it up, because that doesn't always make it easier, does it? No, we're still hurting. But it does help to put in perspective what somebody was able, because of their faith in God, to how they were able to persevere. So I do want you to think for a second about your worst day, the day when you thought, I've blown my patience. I'm up to here. Whatever your spouse, whatever a friend has done, you kind of think through that for a second. And let me read you some of the passage dealing with Job. So we can all can stop for a moment and consider our bad day compared to Job's bad day. It says, now there was a day, and this is from Job, the 1st chapter. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck them down, and the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they're dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Pretty bad day, isn't it? But that's just phase one of Job's day. You know, in phase two, it wasn't over. Because if you remember, Satan goes to God and said, well, you built this little hedge around him. And he said, just don't kill him. You can do what you want to. And so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Do you think when Satan went to God, it was just, well, I'm going to just do a little to him? He was going to do everything he could. But that was just the second part of it. The third part, you can decide how serious this is to you, but it's still extremely significant. Here he is, he's having this horrible time. Everything is falling to pieces. What's the final blow to him? You know what it is?
His friends accuse him of sin.
His friends accuse him of sin.
His wife.
And his wife. And his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. Now, Mrs. Job, she obviously had, a lot that happened to her as well. But still, consider Job, those three significant things, and how he endured with patience through those. Now, the story, as you know, I don't know that I would say it had a happy ending, but it certainly improved. It says in Job 42, and the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camel, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. Let's skip down a few verses. And after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons 4 generations. And Job died an old man, full of his days. God gave him twice as much in flocks, gave him a ripe old age, gave him more children than he had, but he still had the same wife. God didn't change his wife, did he? So what did Job learn from it?
Life's not always fair.
John said life's not always fair.
Life's not always right.
Life's not always right. Okay. As far as patience, what did he learn? Was he able to enjoy the rest of his days with her? When she let him down when he needed her most? What did he learn from it? What did she learn from it? How did they work through it? Well, ultimately, I think he gets back to what the word patience, how it comes from. The Greek word is made up of 2 words, which mean slow to anger. And the reason that I think they went on to be successful in the marriage is because of just that, because of what Job was able to do. When you talk about being slow to anger in Proverbs 14:29, a patient man has great understanding, but a quick-tempered man displays folly. How true is that? You think about road rage, the ultimate example of no patience. A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. And obviously, when we talk about being slow to speak, I'm sure James 1:19 came to your mind. Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. So when we talk about patience in marriage and the need to be able to react the right way, let me just read some things to you, and you in your mind decide, would you rather be married to Job or to Mrs. Job when these things are happening? When your spouse says unkind words, when your wishes are not considered, when responsibilities aren't met, when you feel like your spouse isn't supporting you, when you discuss and make decisions but nothing changes, and all your children and parenting challenges, issues with relatives, allowing work issues to bleed over into the home, health issues, financial difficulties, and just when things aren't going your way? Whose demeanor do you want to live with in marriage when those type things you feel are taking place? Who is it that's going to help? Who is going to be better to work through that type stuff? Somebody that's patient like Job, or somebody like Mrs. Job? So patience is key. Why is it that in marriage patience is such a challenge? I think it's because God brings two flawed people, joins them together, and puts them under one roof in close proximity to each other. Marriage is a training ground for patience, because you can't go run away and say, I'm done with this. You know, you think about everything, all the other situations that we can do that. You're frustrated with your boss, what do? I'm out of here, your job. You don't like the neighbors? We're moving. I don't like my barber, whatever it is, I'm leaving, I'm changing. You can't do that in marriage. You're right here together, and when somebody says something that hurts, somebody fails to do something, it's that much more. That person is so close to you, it has that much of an impact on you. You know, part of it is that I think is putting more and more of a challenge on marriages is just what's happening in society. You think back to a statistic I saw in 1955. The average person stayed in the job for 27 years. That's on average. What is it now? Every 5 years, somebody's changing jobs. Again, and that's part of what's happening in our society, and that puts more and more pressure on marriages. People thinking they can make change because of the situations they're in and they don't like it. But that's not God's plan. God's plan with patience is that we endure through it, that we help each other, that we encourage each other. So let's talk about this evening, what are some of the tools that we use in marriage? We're going to be in that close proximity, and we are married, you know, till the day one of us passes from this earth. What are we going to do to help ourselves in marriage? So, first one, know yourself and how to stay calm. Does everybody know their self? When you start feeling that blood pressure rise, do you control it, or you just let it go on up there and get all jacked up and ready to road rage it? Do you think you're good at controlling it? I think one of the most important things that you can do when you start feeling your blood pressure rising is to realize that I need to pause for a moment. Spend some time praying about it, thinking about it, making a vow to yourself that when I feel my pressure start to go up, I promise myself that I will walk away 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever. I will memorize, I pull from memory my verse that is very encouraging to me. I promise to stop and reflect on the vows I made to my spouse and how important they are to me. Do something to diffuse the blood pressure. Put in perspective what it is that you're upset about. Lawrence, I can remember him having a lesson one time on discipline. And I'm sorry, my kids, that I didn't hear this, before they were out of the house. But, his point was being sure that the punishment equals the crime, as opposed to everything is full-bore punishment. Sometimes we get upset about things that really, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, put it in perspective. How important is it? How many times in life do you talk about, wow, I wish I'd had a different perspective, on that? Allow your spouse the same opportunity to calm down. If both of you are escalating, let them calm down too. you're going to enjoy the discussion much more if you wind up doing that. And then most importantly, consider who it is that we're frustrated with. I'm going to go back to the first class. Talk about, who is your spouse. That's the one that you chose to spend the rest of your life with, that you promised God that you would help redeem, that you would help get to heaven, that they would help you get to heaven. And that's who I'm going to get upset with. Put that in perspective, who it is that I'm getting maybe upset with. What else along those lines would you do to be helpful?
Sometimes when you're working with someone that has an anger problem, not a marriage necessarily, like in teaching, if you sometimes, like, things they're very upset about, if you talk to them about in a few weeks, a few days, is this going to matter at all? Is it going to have any importance to you? And, that has helped me personally in a lot of things.
Yeah, and to that point, I remember Terry's dad talked about he was an elder, and he would often write a letter, and then he would put it in his desk. He wouldn't mail it for like 3 days, and he'd pull it back out, he'd read it again, and put it back in for like another 3 days to be sure that you're checking your emotions, that you're keeping it all in perspective and thinking about, is this the wise thing to do? Very good. All right. Don't sweat the small stuff. And again, we kind of alluded to this. A proverb that I'd put along with that: starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So drop the matter before the dispute breaks out. What's that mean? What's that mean to you?
When you breach a dam, the fault continues to grow and grow. Water does a lot of damage coming through a dam, whether it's concrete or earth or whatever it's made out of. And so it just continues. You let that little trickle begin, and then next thing you know, you got a big gap, and then sections are gone, and it's just a rush of water after that. So before you reach that point, it's time to pull the plug and stop on.
Absolutely. And so when we think about saying something to our spouse, we just want to just kind of get something in there, and then next thing you know, it's grown into an escalated argument. It's like, why did I ever say that? Was that wise for me to go there because of what it has grown into? Was it really that important? If it's important, sure, it's got to be discussed. But truly, did I wait on it? Did I think about it? Did I pray about it? And was it that important? There was I heard of a couple that were frustrating each other with, whether it's socks left on the floor, all kinds of clothes, and one of those deals where they each probably thought they could tell where the other had been around the house, just following their mess and all the other little things. And they said, you know what? Why don't we, when we notice something about each other, we're going to, for 1 month, we're not going to say anything to each other. We're just going to put a little box up there on the table, and when we see something, we're just going to drop a note in there about, what it was that we saw. And so after 1 month, and I don't know, it's pretty cheesy. Maybe it was made up, but after 1 month, they went in there and they opened the box, pulled them all out, and both of them, every time they started to put something in, thought, you know what, that's pretty petty, and wrote, I love you on it. And so they dug out the box, and it's all just, I love you. Don't sweat the small stuff. What does 1 Corinthians 13:4 say? Love is what? Love is patient. Number 3, listen, listen, listen. Proverbs 18:13 says, he who answers before listening, that is his folly and shame. See, one of the things that I learned from the better managers that I worked with over the years, the good ones did not react quickly. They listened. They got as much information as they could. They wanted to talk to as many people as they could. They would sit there and hear you out before they said anything. And almost, just like, please say something, They listened to everything. There's so much wisdom in that, in just sitting down if you're frustrated and just say, talk to me. Tell me why. I want to hear it. What happens when you do that? And I'm not talking about just stopping speaking. That's not listening. What happens in a situation where you're frustrated with something and you sit down and you just want to listen to your spouse about it? What does that do?
It gives you a chance to understand their perspective.
Mm-hmm. Helps you understand their perspective of it, something that you might not have been aware of, and then you didn't make things worse by just jumping in there and assuming. What else? What else does it do?
It allows you to live with your spouse in understanding.
Yeah. First Peter lives with your spouse in understanding them, showing that you care about what they're thinking, that it matters. What else?
I think going off of the understanding where I think often we're taught how to read, we're taught how to speak, we're taught how to write, but we hear things because we actually like to listen and understand it. So when you take the time to really hear what they're having to say, you're not already coming up with your own response. And so really, again, how Phil said, understanding their point of view and listening to what is actually coming.
Yeah, if you sit there, if you listen, supposedly listen, and you come back with your already pinned, framed response in your mind and didn't incorporate that in, didn't listen, what is that? Again, that tells them you really didn't listen to me. But when you listen and your response is based on that says a lot to your spouse. Absolutely. Good point. I mean, obviously, it helps in the overall communication between spouses, helping them feel comfortable, helping them feel valued, letting them know that you love them. And I'll do a little plug for Paul here in a couple of weeks when he's going to talk. He's got a couple of lessons on communication. Actually, we're talking today. There is nothing more important in marriage than communication. Think about it in the business world. Think about it, just how important of whatever you want to talk about, how important communication is. It is vital in marriage. Number 4, if you must speak, be careful what you say. I think we're all fully aware of this one. Proverbs 29 and 22 says, reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healings. When we talked about peace Sunday, and we talked about that lie that we tell our children, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. Biggest lie that you can tell a kid. Words do hurt. They hurt very much. You try to say that to get them to realize, no, it hurts. But it does. It does. When you talk about whether it's a vase or whether it's old Humpty Dumpty and it shatters, it breaks, can you put it back together the way it was? No. And when you say hurtful things to your spouse because you're upset, because you didn't listen, because you didn't wait, you can do damage that takes a long, long time to recover from. What are some, as far as being careful about what you say, what should you, again, I'm sure Paul's going to cover this in detail, but what are some words of wisdom that you would give to people about the words that they choose? What type of things should you avoid? Blame?
Assumptions.
Yes. Assumptions, extremely dangerous.
Holding you accountable for some conversation I've had in my head.
Okay.
Emailing or texting harsh words.
Yeah. And you really got to be, it's going to jump into the next point, but you really got to be careful with texting and emailing, because it is really hard to perceive, you know, the emotion behind those. But yes,
Words like
and you really got to be, you got to really be careful with that, because again, people don't have the opportunity to respond like that. Exactly right. You know.
words like never and
Yeah.
always that indicate that there's just, this is just no exception to this whatsoever.
Staying away from absolutes. Well, you never. Well, you always. Not wise. Not wise at all.
There's something about the tone of your voice too. I mean, you don't want to sound condescending or judgmental. I mean, you have to be thoughtful not only of what you say, but how and in what tone you say it.
Yep, and Wendy is going to help us segue right into the next one there. So if you must speak, be careful how you say it. So Wendy is spot on. Let me go ahead and throw up a proverb for that. The gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Again, just the emotion that you know, not only the words, but the emotion that you put behind it can be critical. The tone of voice says so much about how the message is delivered. I think that gets back to what Scott's talking about. It is so hard to read in tone into text in emails. So when you and your spouse are at work or whatever, and you're texting back and forth, you got to be very careful about that. Let me throw up one more as far as watching your emotions. Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. That's a beautiful passage right there. Just being calm in your tone. 1 Corinthians 13:7. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. It gives you that feeling of meekness, humility, not out to try to jab you to get one up on my spouse, on my partner. Again, to watch your emotions, I go back to the very first point that we made about calming down, praying about it. If you do that, you're much more likely to be willing to apologize, to have the type of conversation that you should have, to be more patient. What else on that point? John?
Sometimes what you say may be correct, but it gets lost when the how you say it is overbearing. Something Jane has reminded me of a number of times over the years is that what you said was absolutely correct, but how you said it came across as dogmatic, as anger. There's no room for discussion here, and we're done. And when that happens in a marriage, it destroys things.
Absolutely. Because what do they remember? What Jane, in that situation, what Jane's remembers is the way you said it,
Yeah.
far more than the message that, okay, well, he was right.
Yeah, the message got lost.
Yeah. Morgan?
I was just gonna bring up, Colossians 4:6 says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person.
Absolutely. Good passage. Very good. What else? Number 6, wait. And when I say wait, not the same as slow down, check your blood pressure, whatever the situation is that has caused the tensions to rise? Does it have? Is it something that had to be solved right now? If it's because she keeps burning the toast, you know, granted you may walk away and calm down, but does that have to be something that has to be figured out right now? And whatever this and you know, I could throw up all kinds of different situations, but we have become so patient that whatever the issue is, it has to be fixed now. And they don't. They don't have to be fixed now. Again, I mean, we live in a country and a society that wants instant gratification. I saw something that said annually I don't know who's just trying to figure this stuff out, but annually they figured people hurrying through red lights cost the country $7 billion a year. I guess, you know, that's that much in that extra gas a year. And on average, wherever people are going, it saves them 50 seconds. But I got to get through that light. I got to go now. I got to have it now. And so many times when we're upset with a spouse, this has to be decided right now. And you know what? Maybe it doesn't. Because maybe we're in the process of growing. Maybe I'm trying to get there. Maybe I'm trying to get better. And in time, I will figure out how to balance my checkbook. You gotta have to be more patient with me. If something's not resolved immediately, patience doesn't stomp off in a huff to go pout. It allows a reasonable amount of time to pass to readdress the issue. It doesn't ignore the problem forever, but it does not insist on its own timetable. It can personally accept the other when problems are not resolved. Remember, who are we working with here? The one that I'm responsible for redeeming, and who is responsible for redeeming with me. Patience is optimistic. If 99% of the situation looks negative, patience emphasizes the 1% as positive. Patience listens, waits, never gives up, even when things look bleak. It remains steadfast when it appears that things might never change. A couple of passages that, again, I want us to realize the big picture here, again, of what we're talking about. Two people in marriage, two imperfect people, under one roof, coming together to try to encourage each other to get to heaven. What do you think you ought to be focusing on? The physical frustrations of life, or the spiritual goal of encouraging each other? So a couple passages that go along with that. So we do not lose heart, though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal glory beyond all comparison. And we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Patience doesn't look at the physical. Patience looks through that and looks at the long-term goal of what marriage is about, helping each other get to heaven. 1 Peter 6-9, if this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessarily you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in the praise and glory and honor in the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him, and though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And then, as we mentioned, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Keep in perspective what our marriages are about and what our ultimate goal is. You know, aside from all of that, let me mention this to you. A couple of things. There are other surprising advantages of an individual who's patient. Guess who has better mental health? People who are patient or people who are impatient? Patient people are more forgiving in relationships. They're more able to understand situations better and to find solutions. Patience brings a sense of contentment in the family. If both partners patiently listen to each other or to their children, there are higher chances of that family life to continue with stability. Cannot emphasize enough how important patience is. A couple takeaways. So, ask yourself, how's your patience? I don't mind. Do I regularly reflect on God's patience with me? What if God was as impatient with me as I am with people? Scary. Who was God? Who was, when you think of God and his patience, who do you think of? Who was he patient with?
Israelites.
Oh my, yeah, the Israelites. But you know, he was frustrated with them for what reasons? Spiritual reasons. I don't mean griping and complaining because of little physical things that took place. It was their spiritual. That's what God was worried about. That's what we have to be worried about. And it wasn't just with the Israelites. You go back to, God was long-suffering in the days of Noah. So God is a patient God. He is long-suffering. He is that way with each one of us. So what Scripture say about, for the one who won't show mercy, it won't come to them. So if I'm not patient with people, do I think God would be patient with me? And then back to kind of the main point. Are you working towards patience in your marriage or just expecting your spouse to do their part? What did we talk about during the first class? You want a happy marriage? Don't worry about the other person. You worry about yourself. You give 100%. If they give 0, they give 0. You give 100%. So are you working towards it? And are your efforts helping to redeem your spouse? So ask yourself, when you ask yourself about patience, how am I as far as patience? Ask yourself, how does this impact the spirituality of my spouse? Am I encouraging them towards God? Am I frustrating them or not? One of the big... Okay, there we go. Thank you for being patient.